Hello, and welcome to IDpodcast with your host, Roger. We're bringing the best discussions and conversations to you about identity verification, AML practices, and much more. Thanks for tuning in.
So, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of ID Podcast. And today I'm joined by I wouldn't say a new face now, but he just hasn't been there for quite a while. But one of the first ever guests, one of the ID Podcast OGs, as you would say. And this is Peter Murray from W2 Data. So welcome, Peter. And how are you doing?
No, I'm all right. I'm good, mate. Yeah, thanks for the invite. It has been a while. There's been some great episodes on there, but it's always good to be coming on and talking about generally what's going on in the industry. But probably like you guys, it's been an interesting period over the last sort of 6-7 months. But business-wise, I guess it's still as busy as ever, and certainly the conversations that come around it just don't stop. So, and that's why I think it's a great idea this morning. It's just a couple of key subjects. We'll talk about them, go through them. And responding to emerging stories. So I'm always up for that and always happy to be invited.
Well, Peter, I mean, since you last came on, I guess there was so many news since then. I mean, you came on the podcast that was just as lockdown came in, which was April time. And we just discussed of the impact of COVID, and no one knew what was going to happen. And still, we don't know what's going to happen. So we just, take it day by day, I guess. But more interestingly, because in the first ever episode where you and Jeremy were on the podcast, we spoke about what CRA checks might look like in the future, or if they will be gone, or what's going to happen with them. Well, talking of CRA checks, quite interestingly, and I'm just going to read it out to you, and we'll take it from there, because there is another 2 more news articles from the BBC that I want to get into. But first of all, here's the statement. The Information Commissioner's Office orders the Credit Reference Agency, Experian Limited, to make fundamental changes to how it handles people's personal data within its direct marketing services. And the enforcement notice follows a 2-year investigation by the ICO, and a complaint from the campaign group Privacy International to the ICO also raised concerns about the data broker industry, specifically Equifax and Experian. And as a result of the ICO's work, all the 3 credit reference agencies made improvements to the direct marketing service business. Equifax and TransUnion made the improvements alongside withdrawing some products and services. The ICO was therefore taking no further actions against them. Well, I mean, it says it's marketing services, but first question that comes out of this, do you think this will also have a significant impact on how credit checks or how data checks will work in the future?
Well, I think, but it's interesting on a number of levels, the whole ICO getting involved and being as firm as they were with one of those 3, because we all know there's 3 CRAs that essentially underpin and support a lot of the identity world. So I don't know why that one particular one has done anything different, while the other 2 have either removed products or at least changed what they've got. But this was all about how they collected it and about openness and transparency. So did they, when taking and doing whatever they did with this data, have they done the right thing? And I think overall, it's very critical, certainly to the gambling sector that you and I work with, but identity in general, that openness and transparency is the way forward. I think the bigger picture, which I know you and I have tended to bang on about for a couple of years now, which is it's about the reliance, or in my opinion, the over-reliance in certain markets of what the credit data actually does and what it provides. That sort of old school legacy, you find me once on a database and that's enough to prove to a certain extent that you can do business with me. And I think, whilst you and I, it would fall under the category of doing what we do, that you would say that, wouldn't you? The fact is, I think we should have moved on from that conversation. What I think is interesting for this on a number of levels is clearly they've had a warning about how they've collected it and what they've done. And yes, it definitely be absolutely clear it's in their marketing services, and where you and I interact is slightly different because it's compliance and regulation. But the fact is, in all the markets we work in, there's more of an emphasis now on having more data, not less. And whether it's waterfalling or layering, or holistic is the latest word of getting a better picture of people, then you do need more data, but it's what you need. And my long-standing view over years now is the CRA's data has a part to play, but is increasingly a smaller part of what they do, of what identity means, because it affects all areas. In this particular case, I think the key thing there is around how they've collected it and what they do. So I guess long-winded answer, but ultimately I think the CRAs in whatever marketplace, it's not just here. You and I have both had recent dealings in Germany, and I certainly want to come to that as we go through. But their position of dominance is diminishing, and I think we all need to be layering in far different sources of data to try and get a proper picture of who you are. So I think from this particular story, I think it will eventually seep into how we would use it in the regulated markets we do.
And I guess in terms of also, talking about the future of data, and you just came to it with, layering, waterfalling. There's many different ways how you can identify people in any business, whether that's financial services, gambling, whatever it is. People need to be identified, and I think COVID has just accelerated many different things, such as companies going digital or having to go digital to identify people. And I think also what's quite interesting, because in this ICO thing it says that the CRAs weren't really telling the people what they were doing with their data. So one question that always poses for me is, sometimes people get identified in the background, right? So, they don't even know that there is an identification check going on. So, and, having GDPR on one side, having Brexit on the other, because it's also a very, very valid topic when it comes to data privacy, because of all what's going on. There seems to be a lot going on, what needs to be changed and what will be changed, and how UK businesses essentially interact with Europe. European businesses or European people even. But where I want to go is, how do you see this playing out? So, this is obviously goes towards marketing services. The real data checks, let's say, are not really impacted. But, there's lots of references to, people don't know what's going on with their data. People don't know what is being used for. So, do you think it might be a possibility where people will have to be asked, an example, when they're doing identity verification, that they give the consent to use the credit data, an example? Or how do you see that planning out in the future?
Yeah, I think consent's going to be critical. I think we've gone decades now where people have just expected to use it. And don't get me wrong, I don't think it's particularly, if I'm being kind to that particular side of the identity market, there's any particular nefarious use for it. But I think, if anything, the Facebook Cambridge Analytica news item effectively changed the game. Customers expect more. There's a couple of key players in this. One is providers and vendors like us who provide and support the services, and the regulators understanding it. But ultimately, the most important asset the industry has is its customers. And I think it's absolutely vital that we build up or rebuild up that trust, certainly in our sector, which has a very different political and media focus on it. We have to have done everything about being open and transparent. And that's not just an operator. They have to be using services out there that are the same. And I think that's the fundamental change. This particular issue was around not making judgments on what people could afford through marketing services, which is really interesting from our side, because the industry is being challenged around affordability. And yes, you could use a compliance angle, but I think being absolutely clear around what that consent might be used for is critical, both from us as people who might consume some of that, and for operators. And the customers are going to expect that. I think the new generation of people coming along that will sustain and support any of the e-commerce sectors, and certainly the gambling sectors, they're not going to put up with the old school way of doing things. And that's just one data source. So I think the whole area of identity is in a bit of flux at the moment, but certainly if we just to concentrate on that CRA data, it's not the bedrock it used to be, and has to adapt. And I think ultimately that's about being clear, open, and transparent about what you're doing and why you're collecting it and where that data is going.
Mm-hmm. And so I just mentioned those two articles, and they're both from the BBC. They're very recent, I would say. I mean, the latest one was from the 27th of October, essentially. So only about 3 weeks ago. What I find very interesting here is one point that they raised, and it says Experian still needs to stop screening out prospective customers from marketing lists on the basis of financial on the basis of financial status. So now my question is, because we know the industry, the identity verification industry, and we know, especially for the gaming side of the things, we have those so-called affordability checks. I'm just putting those things here because...
Yeah, who knows what it means? Yeah.
It is what it is. And what I find very interesting in that is also that people are being classed on a financial status by looking at a postcode. I mean, how is this... I mean, well, first of all, we're talking about responsibility checks, but first of all, how is it responsible to class people by a postcode? It just doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know if it doesn't make sense to you.
No, I think, but then that goes back to we're really working on the basis of a system that's going back 20 years. If, as in a number of sectors, not just the sector we work in, if you're reliant or over-reliant on that as a source of truth, then that's the way it's always worked. But you and I know that within the same postcode, you could have somebody that's potentially very wealthy and somebody that's not. And if you're scrapping around as the consumers of this information, then it's just not sustainable any longer. So I think the challenge around affordability, and it's not just the UK, which is where these stories come from, the same as in Germany, which you and I have dealt with, the same, interestingly, Belgium's introduced a trial period last week or the week before, which is really putting a limit on people's spend. And Germany's big example. Belgium was, if you want to up your limits, you have to pass an affordability check through the National Bank of Belgium. Now, that's somebody just going yes or no without, based on purely numbers, but without taking into account some of the circumstances that would have led to that. So I think the challenge, the obvious answer is we should be taking more and be making more nuanced decisions. But gambling is taken out of the normal field and is treated very differently. So if they're saying you want to up your limit from €500, then you literally have to get a check sent into the bank, and the bank then says simple yes or no, and that's not a discussion point. And I think that bit's got to change. It's a very heavy-handed, uncertain, and certainly it's not backed by any scientific basis of why that should be the case. So your point about postcodes resonates across all of that, which is how do we truly get to somebody's affordability? And it's definitely not postcodes, by the way. But if you're people who've been consuming this data, it's probably at this point the one you're used to. So for me, definitely not the answer going forward, but we need to be able to bring all those layers, and whether that's open banking or some form of the customer consenting to it, is going to be critical, I think.
And those checks, they have a huge impact on people, especially now times where you can't just go out. We're in lockdown right now, as it is in the UK, and obviously you as well. In Spain, you have a lot of restrictions, so you rely on identity verification to verify your identity to, I guess, an address, as well as obviously verifying your identity. Now, what was even more severe, I guess, out of all of this reporting, out of all of these reports, on the 7th of November, written by Dan Whitworth, also on BBC, there was an article about a woman called Laura, and she was refused home COVID test after credit check. So, I mean, seriously, it's just like to me, are we still relying on those static, checks that, don't do anything else but have a simple line against a person and confirms that you might live at this address? I say might because that data is not updated every 10 or 15 or every 24 hours. It's like how can it happen that someone has refused a home COVID test because they have moved into a new property? I mean, and we are in year 2020. I know it's been a crazy year, but I mean, how crazy is it with all of this technology that's available, including some others? Not having to name any specific ones, but it's very simple to just check someone's driving license, that where you have to change the address as soon as you move, by the way. And confirm the address or get a utility bill. Oh, I don't know. But how can it be? I mean, I can't explain, but...
Well, you'd have to, on this case, you'd have to ask the government who'd given out that contract and had told a way to do it. But let's not take the government as a way of judging how ID is going to work. And for me, this story is even more interesting than the other one, because it was a Radio 4 money box story, and it actually had two people. If you read into it, most people have concentrated on the Laura aspect of it. But there was actually another lady, I think, called Kat, and she'd been. Now they were never refused. They never refused because they failed a check. They refused because they couldn't find them. And that, to your point of, we should be using a wider scope to do that. But she just hadn't got a credit card or a loan. She hadn't got a footprint. And I think the research was there's 5.8 million people, whether they've chosen not to go down that route or age or circumstances, mean you are not on the electoral roll, which is obviously a key part of what, say, the CRAs use and addressing stuff is, but they weren't on there. The Laura ones, even as you say, she'd arrived from Australia, been less than 4, but she had got loans and she had got on the electoral roll, and she'd done all the things we tell people to do, but it hadn't been. I think she'd been in the country for more than 12 months, so they didn't fill it, but they just couldn't find her. And that's it. In the circumstances on that story, through the credit rating agency they used, they didn't do anything else. I think the woman involved then had to walk 90 minutes with suspected COVID down a street, passing people. It's just not right. But there's a couple.
I mean, to me, that's bonkers. Quite frankly, I mean, it's.
I think ultimately, if you're particularly slag off the government or regulators or anything like that, but the fact is, they'll go for a bit of a simplified approach, which is, if I can't find you on any of these traditional agencies, you don't exist. And there's virtually nothing you can do about it. And I think both you and I, again, we would say this, but it's true, is the answer in there is around technology. And there's so many, I mean, it's not just these two instances. This affects such a wide number of people, both in the UK, where this story's from, but certainly globally. Because if you get outside of the countries, say European, where you've got a strong amount of legacy data, then there's simply not that stuff there. And that's where certainly services like you guys have got, which is around document and facial, is going to be critical. And how you access that and use your smartphone, it's going to be really important. But I think for those that are financially excluded, and certainly in certain parts of the world, for those that don't have a footprint, whether they've allowed somebody else to control that, so say, and I hate to be stereotypical, but an older female generation who's always let the husband do that work and vice versa. These people haven't got the footprint you need. It can't be right that we use a system that's over 20 years old to do this in 2020. So these are just areas that sort of highlighted it, and especially for a COVID test and mailing out stuff. There's so many different things you can do, from the address capture through to the document and facial verification. It's just wrong. But should we expect the government to embrace the latest technology? I think we're struggling to get them to do that. But the operators and customers we work with across our sectors clearly do. And I think when the banks have got some of the better technology and the government can't use it, you know what, we're a little behind the ball, I think.
I mean, it's quite interesting because I also read, I can't remember the lady's name, because quite frankly, that speech was something else. But essentially in that speech, the EU was called innovation shy and not wanting to innovate, and certain things were blamed on health tech and also other things, but. Last time I remember, an example in Germany, you have a health card that you can go to any doctor. You just put the card in, and they have your whole file. How does it work in the UK? An example. Well, if you can't go to your registered doctor, you're gonna have to go to A&E and clog that space up. So, it's some things where.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I
sorry,
think
go
the
on.
UK suffers. Sorry, it suffers a little bit from we've as a nation, the UK has always been against national ID databases, and I guess it's a subject for another time. When you've got that, it's simpler. Certainly, it's in our world, as the Dutch are regulating, and they might have one. Germans have gone down another route. But if you've got a centralized database, they might use across the Nordics, for example, then it's easier. But that still doesn't stop you from being able to do it just by using different technology. I just think sometimes the people who regulate or monitor or look after these sectors are not embracing what is out there. It might be through a bit of nervousness or misunderstanding, because you and I spend a lot of time with regulators trying to get them to understand the tech that's out there. But the key driver for me is going to be the customers. The customers aren't going to put up with this much longer. That next generation coming through are going to demand that everything's done through their smartphone, or everything is done with the least friction possible. And that's not making it less reliable or less robust. That's just embracing the technology and the data that's out there. And ultimately, longer term, that ability to control the data and identity that's yours, and you decide how that's then released to those people through providers and suppliers like us. I think that's going to be the way forward. But we're some way off that, because, as you'll probably agree, that some of the regulators are not quite up to speed on what's out there and how it's done. But the last point, I guess, for me on that is it's still, and that's so critical around the trust and sustainability. What data, back to the first story, is what data is released and how it's used will create that trust. And if you're a customer, a consumer, you'll have much more confidence if you know what everybody's doing with it.
Yeah, but I mean, it's quite. I mean, to me, why should I have to have a credit card in order for someone to identify me? It's like why do it? Because you just mentioned it. So like it's. These people say that financially excluded people won't be able to be verified. However, really, is it just a financial should I class myself as financially excluded just because I opted out of certain data, which you can, by the way. So for anyone, due to GDPR, you can go and manage your data. You can request the data that's been held. You can ask for certain companies to delete the data they hold against you. And am I financially excluded just because I don't want some of the data, which I find very personal to be on someone's database to identify me?
Well, I think that goes back to my last point, which is we're going to decide in a couple of years what data is released. And I think you're right. It should not be the fact that we're forced to go and get a loan or a credit card or whatever, because that is the perceived way of doing things. Yes, it was 20, 30 years ago. It's not right that it is. It's still that case now, but it is. And I think until that changes, and it will be through the disruptors, it will be through that technology that's coming in that provides that reliability, combined with how the regulators adapt it. But as we stand, it just simply isn't right that the fact we have to get credit or loan data makes that decision on whether we'll be found or not. Because that, and again, we're very UK-centric or EU-centric when we have these conversations. You go to other parts of the world, the emerging continents, where they've just not got the opportunity for a banking system that's been going for 100 years, or a credit system that's been doing that. And that's going to be particularly interesting in our space, is how we get to that. Because what that produces and how we identify and work around inclusion there is going to eventually come back the other way into those traditional markets of Europe and the UK. And that's how you'll identify somebody. And it's all going to be around the technology that supports that for me. And,
I was just thinking then, because we obviously, as we're talking, you could say the overhanging topic is not just CRA data, but it is identity as itself. And, just mentioning different things. I think what we also have to be really careful about is to not make the mistake to have a decentralized IDs, because that is the worst thing that can happen in any country. Because if you have this sort of card, you have this card, to use to identify yourself there. You have to use this card to identify yourself there. Well, for this company, you can either do a CRA check. If we can't find you, go to the post office and let them identify you for like £10, where they just look at the passport, just look at you. Yeah, that's fine. Here's your stamp. See you later. It's obviously a huge topic that needs to be discussed with. I'm not calling myself an identity expert, but at the same time I am, because I've been working in this area for quite some time now. So
I think you're right. I think what that eventually looks like, I don't think either of us are certain. I think we can look at that route you're talking about there, which is tokenized identity. You contract maybe the me-to-be society that says that I hold the power of that in my smartphone, and I decide to release. If I want to get my shopping, I'll release a little bit. If I want to get a car, I'll release more. If I want a mortgage or some big financial commitment, or in our world, gambling is going to be forced down that same route, which is you need all this data out there. I think how it eventually looks, clearly none of us are fully know that, but the power will be switching from those CRA legacy stuff through likes of us into the individuals concerned. And I think how that's taken and delivered securely is going to be really critical. But your customers have shown this. In any survey, or the most surveys that you've seen will come out, customers are more than happy to share this kind of stuff if it's open and transparent and they know what they're going to do with it and that it's protected. So like you, I've been in it sort of a dozen years. I'd love to be able to say I knew exactly what was going to happen, but maybe that's the excitement. We don't. We wouldn't have seen 4 or 5 years ago the technology that you and I have access to now. And equally, we don't know what the 4 or 5 years' time is going to be like, but it's not going to be dull. But I think the industry needs to come with us.
Well, I guess that's why we work in this industry, because it's literally changes from day to day. By the way, for listeners outside of the identity verification industry who don't work in it, because we have, as I shared, some, it's definitely a space, I guess, that will be relevant for some years to come, and seen by all of those, digitalization. That word has been around for I don't know how long. I don't want to even really say it. This as much as the C word, collaboration as we know it. It's definitely an exciting space, and I can definitely recommend to have a look, at some of the providers and to maybe start in the industry, because there is a lot of talent needed in this industry. Let's put it this way. Wherever you look, everyone's looking for people, whether that's tech, whether that's sales, whether that's marketing, because the industry has grown as crazy. If you probably would have asked someone 10 years ago, would someone have predicted that it's worth trillions of dollars? I think
so. You just have to look at the investment that's coming into our space, and you guys have had some, we've had some. It's right across the sector, but nobody's got the right answer of what that end game is going to be. But if somebody had said to me when I joined the industry 12, 13 years ago, you're being compliant, I'd have thought they were mad. But the fact is, this is a technology sector. Your company, my company, most of the companies who do what we do, we're technology companies, and you consume data or services through those. And that's I think why you and I love it, because it's just constantly changing. And you've got to adapt with it, otherwise you won't be here in 2 years' time, never mind 10 years' time. And that's the real challenge, is you and I talk to customers and come back going, well, this is what the industry is asking for. How do we build and adapt to that? So I'd echo that. I think if anybody's looking to get into an exciting, forward-thinking industry and long-term sector, then that identity and the solutions that go with us is a great place to be.
I think I've actually never asked that question to you. Why do you work in this sector? Why are you still in this sector? Because you've obviously been in this sector for No, you're still a very young lad, so don't worry about that. But actually, what's the reason for you to still stay in this sector?
Well, I think if you come back, what was it? I said 12, 13 years when I was asked to come into the sector just to help out somebody for 6 months. And, 13 years later, I'm still there. It's purely, for me, it's purely and simply about how the industry's moving and the excitement and the agility and all those buzzwords that are out there. But it is constantly changing. And mentioned it earlier, you have to change that goes with it. And I don't think there's one period in that the time that I've been in the industry that you've ever felt like you stood still. So whether it's you, we work together briefly, and it's whether you and I go into try and find a solution that would adapt to a market, or trying to adapt a solution that's come from a certain regulatory oversight. It's almost like you sat there going, right, let's make this work. And if you're working in the right companies, you can do that. And it is genuinely really exciting. And I think that the fact that I'm slightly older than others probably helps me remain young, trying to keep up with everybody. But it is true. The fact is, this is so constantly changing. And you see the developers that come in, the support services that come in. I mean, we're only a company of 40, 50 people. But man, the things you can do with that to try and adapt to what the customers want. I think that's probably the same for you. I don't know. I mean, you've been slightly less than me, but that's certainly my view. I'll throw that back at you. Why are you doing what we're doing?
I think, to be quite honest, I mean, as you said, every day is a new thing. Well, I mean, let's not over exaggerate it, but let's put it this way: every week throws something new at you. I guess from that perspective, well, what really excites me, I think it's, working with so many different people, first of all. I mean, you work with the world's biggest brands, first of all, right? I mean, literally, we work with, some people don't even realize it's your company that's behind this. But, for me, is also this, like, I don't know how it is about you, but every time I register someone, I was like,
you try to explain what you do.
That could be better, and just trying to, I'm just genuinely interested into basically.
Exactly. That's why you and I will have these conversations about what's happening in identity, why regulators are doing what they do, where the industry's going. Because I think there's a sort of passion and a real interest in how we do it. And I think for me that's it. It's just constantly changing, and in a world. It's trying to stay ahead of the game. Whatever I've done throughout my career, you always want to stay ahead of the game, be first to it. We've all got sales at the core of what we do. But this time, especially the last year and going forward, it is going to be around collaboration. And those days of just standing alone and going, I'm going to win this business, they've gone as well. So for example, how you and your business and our business sort of collaborate to try and help that process is key. And that's just added, and that's really just come in over the last year or two. And that adds another layer into it. So
I think it has come into there because I think also, as it is with every industry, you just have some dinosaurs in the industry, and they basically just do the way they want it to be. They have their way of, and it literally, I'm sorry, but it literally pisses me off. Like when I hear certain things, but this company told me to do this because it has always been done like that. No. It might have always been done like that, but there's better ways to do it. There is quicker ways to do it. There's more cost efficient ways to do it. And the problem is you have to then speak for the whole industry, but you still want them to be excited about your product. So, I mean, I've literally got no problem mentioning my competitors in some of the calls and saying, they're doing a great job. I mean, they're doing a fantastic job. I can only tell them what's maybe better about my company. And still, I think in our industry, this mindset is still missing, where everyone just wants to have everything to themselves. I mean, it's fine, if you're successful with that, absolutely fine. But, I mean, for us, it's a little bit different than for you, right? Because, we are very independent. We can work with any partner, really. We can work with end customers. And it really does matter to me, because as long as there's an agreement in place, whether you consume my software through a W2 or whether you consume it through someone else, it really, really does matter. But the problem is not everyone has the same mindset, and it's just. And
we all know who they are. No, I think you're right. And if we
I just said dinosaurs, so you exactly know what I mean.
You and I, over the last sort of 2 weeks, I was with Oliver in Berlin at the event, got to meet human beings. It was great. But the fact is, the conversations we've had over the last 2 to 3 weeks about how if we can help each other, they may well go off and then consume your services or through ours or separate. But the fact is, it's got the customer what they want. And I think we have to, this change of mindset for the new companies and disruptors and stuff coming in. And I've got to say, some of it's around age and the younger generation coming through with completely different ideas. We also, for example, deal in the payment sector, and that's the same. People are just disrupting, and I think that's forcing people down. But whatever your sector and whatever your time, there'll always be people that will refuse to embrace that. And you know what? They like Blockbuster, they won't be around for any time soon when the next Netflix comes in. So the challenge for you and I is just to stay ahead of that game.
That's a great analogy because only last week I just reread the thing about Blockbuster Netflix, where Blockbuster was actually offered to buy Netflix for, I think, like $50,000 or something, but they said nah, it's not. And then 4 years later, yeah, see you later. So
I'd love to know exactly who that was and sat and have a beer with them.
Yeah, I think. I guess that person at Blockbuster, the C-level that's made a decision, he still has his villa in Los Angeles somewhere and is living a nice life. So,
But hey, just made one decision.
But hey, that's not our Blockbuster problem. Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure, Pete.
Enjoyed it.
I think we're definitely gonna have to repeat it because news are coming in on a weekly basis. So there'll be definitely enough news to discuss in about 4 or 5 weeks' time. So
I think so. Look, and certainly from my, I didn't want to bore everybody with me coming on all the time, but I think the approach you're taking, which is as the new stories come up, gets people to make and comment and talk about it, and then look at different angles, certainly of the sector we're in. Is the way forward. It's all about the content. It's all about talking around what's here and what's now. So yeah, look, I'll always come on if you've got something you think I can contribute to. But for bringing us on, I'd like to say thanks, and let's do it again sometime soon.
So I mean, thanks very much for listening to this episode. I think it's been actually topic wise probably one of the most discussed topics.
Certainly now.
Yes. I mean, looking forward to everyone's comments. I mean, maybe comment on how do you think identity should work going forward. Put your ideas forward. I'm happy to discuss it at the next podcast. Maybe pick up some of those comments and discuss them. And otherwise, please subscribe on all the platforms that you can imagine: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. You can see our radio faces on YouTube as well. So it doesn't really if you like that, but
definitely subscribe, but actually comment, actually engage, because we have thoughts. We think we might be right, but you know what? We've proven time again. Every now and again, we get it wrong. So I think whichever of the podcasts they do or the webinars either of us on, it's critical that people engage. So let's make that the goal.
I mean, it's made by engagement, and with made by engagement, I hope you have a great day wherever you are in the world. I hope you are okay. Stay healthy, and we'll speak to you next time.
Good stuff. Thank you.